Hello, everyone. Welcome you to the Asian American Scholar Forum webinar in November. My name is Xiaodong Zhang, a member of the forum. I'm also a professor of computer science and engineering at the Ohio State University. Since Asian American Scholar Forum, AASF, is the sponsor of this webinar, I would like to say a few words to introduce the organization. AASF was established early this year, 2021. This young organization is nonprofit and non-political, representing a community of Asian American scholars. AASF has more than a dozen Asian American professional organization members in different areas, representing more than 7,000 Asian American scholars. Our mission is to promote academic belonging, opening, and equality for all. The webinar theme today is timely and very important. As all of you know, the tensions in relations between China and US in the past 3 years have raised concerns and questions about academic collaborations with Chinese institutions, which had been encouraged before 2018. Our webinar today will discuss these related and complicated issues. We're very fortunate to have 4 prominent scholars and leaders from 4 research-intensive universities to share us their thinking about these issues. So let me first introduce the moderator of the webinar. Professor Yasheng Huang is APEC Professor of International Management and a Professor of Global Economics and Management at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is the Faculty Director of Action Learning at MIT's Sloan School of Management. He was Associate Dean in the Sloan School between 2013 to 2017. Yasheng was on faculty at University of Michigan and Harvard Business School before MIT. Yasheng, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Xiaodong. Thank you for introducing about our organization and introducing me to the audience. We have an excellent panel of four prominent scholars, leaders of their own universities, to share with us the thinking and the discussions at their universities about collaborations with Chinese institutions. I'm going to make a very brief introduction about each one of them and then turn to them and ask them about the kind of issues and discussions they have had. First speaker is Professor Mark Elliott. Professor Mark Elliott is the Vice Provost for International Affairs at Harvard University, and Mark Schwartz, Professor of Chinese and Inner Asian History at Harvard. And then we have Professor Randy Katz. Professor Katz is Vice Chancellor for Research and Professor of Computer Science at UC Berkeley. Then it is my honor to introduce my colleague at MIT, Professor Richard Lester, Associate Provost and Japan Steel Industry Professor at MIT. Last but definitely not the least is Professor Peter Michelson, a Senior Associate Dean for the Natural Sciences, and the Luke Blossom Professor in the School of Humanities and Sciences at Stanford University. So we're going to have first round of questions, and I'm going to ask some follow-up questions. First, I will turn to you, Mark. And Mark, if you could share with us the kind of discussions and conversations that you and your colleagues have at Harvard have been having about managing academic collaborations with Chinese institutions. maybe what are the areas of the consensus? What are the areas of the disagreement? If you can share with us some of those discussions, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much, Yasheng, and Xiaodong. Thank you also for the invitation to be here tonight. It's illustrious company I'm in, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to speak with members of the AASF. I think I'll just say very briefly in terms of the conversations that we're having. We are all in agreement that we need more, not fewer collaborations with China. There's no disagreement on that point. But I want to begin by referring to a question that I've often been asked since becoming Vice Provost 6 years ago, and the Chief International Officer, if you want to call it that, at Harvard. And the question is Harvard a global university that happens to be in the US, or is it an American university that aspires to have a global reach? I get this question a lot. I've given it a lot of thought, and I've heard a lot of people, had conversations with people about it, and I've come actually to an answer, and it's not the it's both answer. It's the Harvard is an American university. It is an American university that sees itself as having a role to play both internationally and domestically, but it is an American university. So why do I begin this way? I begin this way for a couple of reasons. One is that I want to emphasize that as an American university, Harvard is dedicated to serving the welfare of the nation, and it always has been. It even gave up the president's house to George Washington for a couple of weeks back in July 1775 when he needed a temporary headquarters. It turns out the building was too small, so he moved out to another house. But we did that, and for nearly 4 centuries, Harvard has pursued its academic mission to help advance the national interest, and it remains committed completely to doing that, to following the requirements such as are made by the government as far as administering funds, bringing foreign students and scholars to campus, adhering to export controls, and in general, adhering to the law and to security requirements. The second reason I begin by stressing that we are an American university is because I believe it's precisely our qualities as an American university that attract foreign students and scholars to our classrooms and laboratories and that make us what we are. Those qualities include maintaining and defending the institutional structures that help to preserve academic freedom and liberal intellectual inquiry, and that create an environment in which originality of mind, hard work, and commitment are universally respected, and individual achievement is recognized and celebrated, regardless of one's country of origin, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or age, or any of those things. These are the qualities that make Harvard great. I would say they are the qualities that make MIT great. They're the qualities that make Stanford great. They're the qualities that make Berkeley, my alma mater, great, that make all of our schools great. So if we stop and ask ourselves, why are we meeting here tonight? The answer has to be, I think, because we're worried that some of these qualities may be at risk of being lost, and that the research enterprise itself, perhaps, is at risk of being weakened. Indeed, we're worried, I think, and this is what I hear in the conversations I'm part of, that in the discussion around the way that academic research is being conducted, the national conversation, that is, about the way that academic research is being conducted at American universities these days, a choice is being framed that you can either be a university committed to serving the national interest, or you can be a university that is committed to academic freedom, but you cannot be both. And I would say from the conversations I've been part of for the last few years with university colleagues at Harvard and with colleagues around the country, I would say we all agree that that choice between national security on the one hand and research openness on the other hand is a false choice. That is, we believe you can. I'm hearing everybody says to me, we can be serving the national interest as we have always done, and we can continue to remain open to research wherever that research might take us. In fact, I think we can talk about this perhaps tonight, but I think we would agree that in fact research openness is in fact necessary for national security, in the sense that maintaining an open academic community is a requirement for continued research excellence in pretty much any field you can think of, and that national security is tied inherently to research excellence. I mean, my co-panelists are much bigger experts on this than I am, but if you look at the last 80 years, it seems inarguable at that point. So the problem, of course, is that the kind of either-or framing that we are seeing some of, not everywhere, but we're seeing some of it anyway, and it is somewhat alarming. In this kind of framing, scientific collaboration with academic colleagues at institutions in countries that are seen as unfriendly to the United States, and the focus tonight is on China, but China is not the only country here. That kind of collaboration has come to be seen by some as suspect, right? As a betrayal somehow by its very existence of the national interest. And what this means is that the chill in US-China political relations, a topic, Yasheng, on which you're the expert, has been translated into a chill on US-China academic relations more generally. And this reversal of some 50 years of precedent has put a cloud over what had until recently been celebrated really as a large and robust network of collaborations and relationships between scientists in our two countries. And I have to say here that as a scholar myself of Chinese history, who spent most of the last 40 years trying to learn the language, I still come upon new Chinese characters I never saw before, so it will never end. But I've been in the field for 40 years, building connections with colleagues in China. This turn of things is deeply troubling to me personally, and it just makes me very sad. So, but as Vice Provost here, the thing I'm really most worried about is that I know how productive and important collaborations with Chinese colleagues have become, and the idea that they would end, that there would be some sort of academic decoupling, to me poses very serious challenges to the whole model of the open campus and open research that define the American university. So those are I think really the big ticket questions that are bedeviling many of us today, and each of our institutions, I suspect, may approach the problem in slightly different ways, but I think we're probably all encountering more or less the same set of problems, which are centered around how to balance legitimate concerns of the government around national security, which we all acknowledge, with and legitimate concerns, I would add here, of funders on reporting, with the legitimate concerns of universities around, and university researchers around academic freedom and the research enterprise. So there are quite a number of issues here. I mentioned reporting, compliance, that kind of thing is one. Difficulties of sustaining collaborations in pandemic conditions is something that's surfaced more recently. I would add in here the climate of fear among Chinese and Chinese American faculty, students, and scholars, which is a very serious problem at Harvard, and I know at many other institutions as well. Very troubling. Our concern over continued ability to recruit and retain faculty, students in China who come, faculty, students, and scholars who come from China. Hesitation around new collaborations. I'm hearing all the time from people who say, I'm just not going to work with partners in China right now. It's just not worth it to me. I find that very troubling. How do we deal with that? Is I think a very big problem for us. Lack of information on all sides is an issue for many of us as well. And then there are some of the bigger issues around the whole geopolitical shift, the times that we're in. So there's a lot here. I've already spoken more than my 5 minutes, so I'll stop here. But those are some of the things that are on our minds at Harvard.
Thank you, Mark. This is an excellent set of comments. Let me turn to Randy. Same question, discussions at Berkeley, consensus, disagreements. Thank you.
Well, I think Mark has really covered the broad spectrum of issues that have arisen on our campus. We are an international campus. We encourage international collaborations. We want to work with the best and the brightest wherever they are in the world. We want to attract the best and the brightest to our campus for collaborations, for study, etc. We're located on the West Coast. Our campus points through the Golden Gate towards China. We have a long history of collaboration with Asian nations and certainly China in the history of our institution. As an engineer and also as the Vice Chancellor for Research, the compliance part of the campus processes report to me, and I'd like to, as an engineer, sort of tackle the problem in front of us, which is how to engage with China, but do it from a way which is compliant with the current set of rules and regulations. In some sense, over the last few years, our universities have had to up our compliance game. We've had to ask deeper, more probing questions, not to inhibit our faculty from collaborating with other countries, but just raising and reflecting the concerns, the national concerns about this. So part of that compliance apparatus on my campus, as I'm sure it is on my colleagues' campuses as well, we worry about research ethics. We worry about proper engagement of experimentation with human and animal subjects. We worry about conflicts of interest. Generally, we have not vetted international collaborations in the same way we think about those aspects of research activity, human and animal subjects, ethics, and so on. What the current climate has caused us to do is to think seriously about how to ask a set of questions to vet an international collaboration. So let me kind of summarize my thoughts about this with an example. A young faculty member in our School of Public Health came to me and given the context of conversations about engagement with China, this particular faculty member had the opportunity to collaborate with Chinese researchers on applying a particular data analytic algorithm to genomic data that was uniquely collected by the Chinese collaborator. So this is apply a discovery and invention at Berkeley to an entirely new, larger data set than our Berkeley researcher had access to. This would undoubtedly lead to new research results, new impact on the algorithm that the individual faculty member had developed. The asset of the Chinese Institute was unique in terms of its size and breadth, and generally US researchers do not have access to genomic information from the Asian landmass. So this is good for research to pursue this collaboration. But I began answering her question. Well, the first thing I said is, absolutely, don't worry about government oversight and those sort of things. If it makes sense for you to pursue this collaboration, you should, because it will advance science in a way which is beneficial, not just to the researchers, but to society writ large. However, there are some questions I would like to ask you. Do you know how the genomic data was collected in China? Were the individuals who participated in that data collection, were they well informed about how their genomic data would be used? Do your Chinese colleagues follow the same set of standards and guidelines that are followed by researchers in the United States to adhering to National Institute of Health guidance? And I began asking these set of questions, which are really more about ethical research in an international collaboration than are particularly about collaboration with China. And I have to admit, at the end of the conversation, the faculty member said, Vice Chancellor Katz, I don't know the answers to those questions, but I think I will not pursue that collaboration. Now, that's unfortunate in some sense, but it raises a set of issues which go beyond the rhetoric about national security and economic competition to when we engage in an international collaboration, it should be done in an ethical manner which adheres to our own standards and sort of practices of how to do research. And we should be able to engage in those conversations with our collaborators in China. The same kind of ethical commitments, the same, sort of issues around confidentiality, the same bilateral sharing of results, and all these other aspects of what constitutes a positive, collaborative, ethical collaboration. And so, that's maybe a little bit of an unfortunate example, because it was not my goal to really inhibit this researcher from working with China, but it just illustrates how in an international collaboration, we have to up our compliance dialogue with our faculty and vet the relationships, not to inhibit them, but to ensure that the same kinds of standards are applied to the way in which we collaborate with researchers wherever they are in the world, China or otherwise, to adhere to our expected standards. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Randy. Just very short, you would have asked the same question if the researcher proposed to do the same project in Japan, in Korea, in France, right? Is that a fair?
That is absolutely true,
Yeah,
yes.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, Richard, same question, discussions at MIT, consensus, disagreements.
Thanks, Yasheng, and also thanks to the Asian American Scholars Forum for the opportunity to be part of the session. Let me say that I agree with many of the points that the speakers have already made, and maybe especially I resonate with Mark Elliott's observation about the point that we don't need to choose between serving as institutions, as universities. We don't need to choose between serving the national interest and sustaining the commitment of our institutions to openness. I think that's really a very fundamental point. I just want to resonate with that. But let me perhaps make a couple of other points, drawing on, and this is responding to your question, Yasheng, drawing on a number of years of internal discussions at MIT about this question. And these conversations, and maybe just quickly by way of introduction, I'm like Mark, I have responsibility for MIT's international engagements, but I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert on China. I'm actually a professor of nuclear science and engineering. But we have had a number of years of discussions at MIT about these questions, and these conversations have been necessary partly because the members of our community who are of Chinese origin, students, postdocs, faculty, staff, play a critical role in the success of our institute. And the situation of many of those members of our community has become very difficult. But these conversations have also been necessary because there's really no precedent for the evolving geopolitical relationship between the US and China. And parallels with the Soviet Union during the Cold War era are useful up to a point, but they really don't take us very far. And this is fundamentally a new situation that requires new thinking. And so for the last few years, as I said, we've been conducting a series of conversations internally, as also with experts and others from outside MIT, to understand better what's happening and how we can best prepare for what's likely to be a prolonged period of increased rivalry and competition with China, possibly punctuated by episodes of confrontation, and how are we going to prepare ourselves for that? So a few points. First of all, at MIT, and I know this is true of all of the universities represented here, we take seriously the concern that foreign governments may be targeting US university research to gain advantage over US interests. And as a consequence, we've enhanced our review processes before agreeing to collaborations or sponsored research. And many of the points that Randy made, I think, I would similarly make about our review processes. At the same time, we believe that the US has benefited immeasurably and continues to benefit from its open research and educational system, which enables US scientists to share their work and enables us to attract the best students and researchers from around the world. One of our biggest advantages of a society is that we are the destination for the most talented people from around the world. And cutting that off would be much worse than any risk of espionage that we face on our campuses. But the third point is that US law and US policy needs to strike the right balance between openness and protection. And it is very easy in this area for the solutions to be worse than the problems that they are intended to solve. And it is also quite easy for the government to impose restrictions that would damage US research capacity more than China's. And I think in that regard, it's unfortunate that the strains and the mistrust that have opened up in the relationship between the American academic community and the federal government have now become a significant obstacle to progress. But perhaps an even bigger problem is that we haven't had a clear articulation of national policy priorities for the academic relationship with China, especially with respect to science and technology. Of course, the government has been very clear about the importance of raising campus awareness of research security risks. And there are continuing concerns across the federal government that academia still isn't taking this seriously enough. But whether or not that was true in the past, I don't think it's true now. It would be very difficult, I think, to find university researchers today who are not aware of the federal government's concerns about this issue. But beyond this issue of research security, what are the other policy objectives for academic collaborations with China? Would policymakers agree, for example, that we are in a global competition for scientific and engineering talent with China? And if so, would they also agree that it would be important for the United States to win that competition? Is it currently our policy to attract and retain the most talented people from overseas? Another question, is it still the policy of the United States that American university science should operate in an environment in which the free exchange of ideas is a vital component? Maintaining the system of open research has been a longstanding federal policy objective, at least since the days of President Reagan. Is it still? Another question is, how does US policy view the benefits to the United States of research collaborations with China? How significant are those benefits? Are they now outweighed by the risks? Or can the risks be managed in such a way that the collaboration is still possible? And I think a clear articulation of policy goals in these and related areas would be very helpful. But even with more clearly articulated federal policies, the universities are still going to need to develop their own policies for China engagement. The government isn't going to dictate all aspects of policy, and nor should it. So we need to establish our own guardrails in addition to the red lines that the government sets. And we also will need to deal with less clear-cut situations that don't cross red lines, but where still the risks to the country and to the university itself must be balanced against the intellectual benefits of the collaboration. And we need processes to help make good decisions here. And those processes must be credible both to the academic research community and to government policymakers. And related to this, let me make one final point. And I think I've been talking also a bit too long, but in order to make good decisions, we need to understand who and what we're dealing with in China. I think we understand that when President Xi looks at the United States, he thinks he sees a nation in decline. And I think we also understand that President Xi has shed most of the constraints of collective leadership that have guided Chinese policymaking in previous decades. But there's also a lot that we don't understand, and having the necessary expertise in Chinese politics and culture and business and history and economics, as well as science and innovation, is important both for national policymakers and for decision makers in our universities. And it's my sense that we have been underinvesting in this area of scholarship. Now, at MIT, we're fortunate to have distinguished China scholars in these fields, including, of course, Yasheng, from whom we can learn and have learned. But I think at the national level, we need to raise our game in area studies generally and in China studies specifically. So let me finish at that point. Thanks, Yasheng.
Thank you, Richard. Just a footnote to what you just said. During the Cold War, there was a lot more support from the government for studying of Soviet Union, studying of China, than there is now for area studies today, which is not a very good situation. Thank you, Richard. Peter, same question to you, the conversations at Stanford.
Peter's on mute.
There we are. So thank you, Yasheng. And I want to thank my colleagues who have spoken on this topic. That I think everything you're saying demonstrates what a complex and challenging set of issues we're dealing with. And I haven't found anything so far that I disagree with, but I would make a couple of points about my conversations at Stanford with my colleagues, my faculty colleagues in the natural sciences. I think the social sciences are a whole other area that I don't have as much expertise in at all. But I think in the natural sciences, it is generally recognized that collaborations with scientific institutions and colleagues in China have been very beneficial. Most of my colleagues would not do them unless there was benefit. And that has to do with, and it's done in a climate of open research. And I think largely that's been reciprocated. And I think the issues the federal government is concerned about have more to do with the impacts of technology theft, et cetera, which I don't think universities are really on the front line of that. It's more in the industrial sector and so forth. And I realize it's very complicated. But at universities, I think when I look at the track record of the Department of Justice, at least the public aspects of it, it is utterly miserable. And they're not even embarrassed, but they should be. And I think there have been a number of court cases that demonstrate that. So I think one has to keep that in mind. And but I'm also concerned that I think one of the main objectives of at least one government policy that's still in place, the so-called China initiative of the Department of Justice, was really using the justice system to carry out a political agenda to discourage collaboration with China. and the cases that have gone to court have, as I said, I think they're very notable ones that were utterly misguided, and the courts have made very clear rulings on a number of recent cases. So that's troubling, but I think the people it troubles in my university the most are Chinese and Chinese American scholars, and they are truly scared. And I think that troubles me the most. And I think it is setting this country back. We've got to address that. And I think, we have a partnership with the federal government that over years has been very productive. And right now it's very strained. And I think there has to be more engagement to really make the case to the government about what the current policies are a mistake, and make the case for why engagement with China in academic research is important for the nation. And I don't think we're doing a very good job. It's very complicated, but I think we need to do a better job. Now, as far as what's happening more recently, I'll just mention a couple of things, very specific things. A few weeks ago, my colleagues and I all received from our research administration a summary and links to new federal guidelines and disclosure requirements for federal grants and contracts among a number of federal agencies. And this, I'll just quote from one junior faculty colleague who received this, and she wrote to me, and I'm just going to quote it. I won't say who it is, but she's a young colleague. She said, "This ever expanding list of reporting requirements and bureaucracy from federal agencies is troubling. Essentially, if the rules become this complex, pretty much no one can be in compliance at all times, despite their best intentions. And then the Department of Justice will always be able to use non-compliance to go after whichever group they're in the mood to target on any given day. Is there any effort to push back against these ever expanding requirements?" she asked. "Even outside the issue of targeting Chinese scientists, at some point, all of this starts to seriously interfere with time and bandwidth actually available for research." Now, she happens to not be Chinese, but she is an immigrant. And another much more senior faculty member remarked, again, about particularly the new NIH rules, that this is a trap. Now, that certainly reflects heightened paranoia, that's clear. But I think without a doubt, one thing I think everyone is certain of is that the administrative burden of all this is increasing. And the current discussions are not particularly clear. And I think there's deep concern around that. So I think in terms of the discussions we're having, the main concern is about the risk of violating some federal rule without really knowing you're doing it. And I think that's troubling. We've got to get beyond that. The other thing many of my colleagues have observed, and I think this is important to note, that, and I have some collaborators in China. I don't have extensive collaboration, but all the collaborations I've had with scholars in China in my area of physics have been ethical, they've been collaborative, and I'm really proud of that. And I would say also the vast majority of the graduate students and postdocs that we've had at Stanford from China that I've been in contact with, and this is, my colleagues tell me the same thing, they come here with a dream of employment, often in US universities or industrial research. And they didn't come here, and I will quote someone, they didn't come here to, quote, steal their way up the economic ladder at our expense. And that kind of statement is a very broad generalization that I think is very harmful and I think needs to be spoken out against. It's just not helpful. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. I think several common themes have emerged from the initial remarks. One that Mark made, that we shouldn't make a choice between national security and research excellence. There's a desire for clearer articulation of the goals. And Peter, you just made a point that we, either as academics or as universities, ought to make ought to do a better job in explaining to the outside world about these issues. But the reality is that a lot of people disagree with us, right? And those are pretty powerful people. So let me go in the reverse order. Peter, has Stanford had conversations with Biden administration about some of these issues? To the extent you feel comfortable, could you share with us?
Yeah, I personally haven't, but I think some of my colleagues have, and I think from what I understand from some fairly senior colleagues, that at least at OSTP, there's an understanding, and I think they're probably more aligned with this conversation than the general political atmosphere in Washington. But I think the challenges are coming from more the law enforcement and let me put it this way, not OSTP. But I don't know that landscape very well. I also think it's important to look at quantitative data and explain the benefits that the United States has gotten from research from China and still gets. Somehow there's a feeling that we own all the knowledge and it's leaking out. It's actually a two-way street. And I think that's important to get that point across.
Richard, can you say something about what MIT has done in this area?
Yeah, so a lot of our efforts in this area are led by our Washington office, which works also with the university associations and is very actively involved in conversations in the administration. But I think I would note that a lot of the momentum for new policy, new regulation, new institutional approaches, and new actions toward universities is coming from Congress. And it's been pointed out, many times, but it's worth pointing out again that the China policy is one of the very few areas of broad agreement in Congress between the parties. And so it's very important in thinking about how to address these issues, to have an approach that involves direct conversation with people on Capitol Hill who are leading the charge. I completely agree with Peter's observations about the China initiative. But I think we also have to recognize that these are actually quite hard problems. This is a very difficult problem, and we know that nuance isn't done well in Washington, and this is an area where nuance is really needed. I can't say that I'm optimistic about the direction that I'm seeing in Washington. I think the continuity between this administration and its predecessor on China policy has been noted. I mean, of course, there are differences in style, but on many issues that are of direct relevance to the universities, there's also continuity. But I think we have a job to do, and we must keep doing it as best we can, of making the case that all of the panelists this evening have made, and be hopeful and optimistic that people in Washington will listen. And I do think there is some evidence that people do listen when we make thoughtful arguments. But I think it is also on us to make clear that we do take seriously the magnitude of the challenge that is being presented to the US and the West by the current Chinese government. I think we need to take that seriously. We need to demonstrate that we take it seriously. And I think if we do that, there is a chance of real dialogue between the universities and the government, which, and I think Peter said this, is so important in this area. This is not something that we can handle in a single interaction. This is an evolving situation. It's going to look probably quite a bit different in 3 years from the way it looks today. And that means that we need to have an ongoing dialogue with our representatives and colleagues in Washington.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Let me offer a very short observation and then turn to Randy and Mark. My impression is that during the Cold War, the Union of Concerned Scientists, spoke in one voice about U.S.-Soviet relations, about McCarthyism. I'm just struck by the fact that the China Initiative and all of that has not attracted a collective articulation from academia. Individual universities may have conversations with the administration, with Congress, but there hasn't been, as far as I know, I may not know all of it. As far as I know, there has not been a collective voice. Randy, maybe what I said is factually incorrect. If I am, please correct me.
Well, I wanted to react to several of the points that Peter and Richard raised, and of course your questions. So it's well known that at the height of the Cold War, the Reagan administration actually put forward a national security directive, which I will quote from. Our leadership position in science and technology is an essential element in our economic and physical security. The strength of American science requires a research environment conducive to creativity, an environment in which the free of exchange of ideas is a vital component. To the maximum extent possible, the products of fundamental research should remain unrestricted. And this was primarily geared towards, the Cold War confrontation with primarily the Soviet Union, but also with the People's Republic of China. That is Ronald Reagan's administration who put forward that National Security Directive. It's National Security Decision Directive 189. So there's a precedent in this. And my own personal experience in this, I participated in a roundtable in June with the congressional caucus. Congressman Raskin was the chair, and caucus chair Chu, who represents the Asian American caucus in Congress, was essentially the co-sponsor of a broad discussion about the provocative title of the roundtable was researching while Chinese American, ethnic profiling Chinese American scientists, and a new American brain drain. So these issues are understood, at least in certain corners of Congress. And it's not limited to the Chinese American caucus, though they are very vocal in regard to the sort of emphasis on and calling into question the loyalty of Chinese American scientists in the United States. It's also people like Congressman Raskin, who is concerned about the civil liberties dimensions of particularly the China initiative. I had an opportunity to meet with one of our local congressmen, John Garamendi, who actually is the congressman from Davis as opposed to the East Bay or San Francisco, about this particular issue. So I began the conversation with him exactly along the lines that Richard and Peter have taken, of the importance to the American research enterprise of Chinese scholars, our engagement in an international research community, working with the best and the brightest wherever they are. And it's an uphill battle. Even though he represents, a major research university with a lot of his constituents work at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories or in the various high-tech industries which are located in that part of the Central Valley of California. His still view, and it's not an easy political position for a congressperson to take, of it's easy to bash China. It's hard to defend collaboration with China. And so we need to work with those voices in Congress which are holding our executive branch to task for, as Peter pointed out, the incredible ineffectiveness of the China initiative. What began as an investigation into industrial espionage has evolved into catching people out for not following strict compliance and disclosure rules. If that is the sum total of the effectiveness of their investigations, it's not what it was meant to do. It's protecting nothing about the United States. It's just showing, we need to do a better job of communicating what is the necessary compliance. I understand, Peter, it's onerous, but I guess I'm in the compliance business for my campus, and we try and educate our faculty as best we can how to stay in compliance, but ultimately it's up to them to validate what they're doing. But let me just come back to your question and end with, there are actors within Congress who are willing to work with the research community. I've signed a petition co-sponsored by a researcher at Stanford and one of my colleagues at Berkeley that was sent to the Attorney General to end the China initiative. Many scholars have signed that petition. We have congressional representatives who are, sort of, I think, on the right side of this issue. We need to continue to support them, engage with them, and provide, whatever ammunition we can for them to advance the dialogue and to bring our federal agencies back from the brink in terms of what they have been doing recently.
Thank you, Randy. Mark.
Thanks, Yashang. Yeah, I don't know how much I really have to add here. I think my colleagues have made all just excellent points. There's on nothing do I disagree with what I have heard. It's somewhat discouraging to realize that despite the presentation of what we regard as excellent arguments, backed by faultless logic and historical precedent and so forth, that people still remain unmoved. And that's probably owing to our training as academics, that usually when we do those things, we expect people to be persuaded, at least our students. But we're not dealing with our students here. And so maybe we're not most of us anyhow, not trained for this kind of work. This is a political problem, it seems to me, first and foremost, that is embedded in what appears to me anyhow to be, and Yashang, you will, again, I defer to your expertise on on the current political scene, but really an epochal change in the balance of world power. So in a way, it's not surprising that we are seeing this kind of fallout. As I think Randy said, it's easy to bash China. It scores you political points. You know, if you're a politician, you're looking to score political points. That's your job. So the problem we have is that we need to deal with this not as an intellectual issue, but as a political issue, and that by definition means it's an iterative process of repeated engagement and going back to people again and again, and trying to persuade them where their best interests actually lie and where the national interest lies. And we don't control all of the variables here that will eventually, I have to hope, make it possible for some in Congress, as I think that's where a lot of the challenges that we face are arising out of Congress. New legislation is being proposed pretty much every week, my understanding, that would do, you know, that would limit, legally limit different kinds of collaborations with China. So this is still quite an intense debate that's proceeding there. You know, we will need to continue to just hammer away. And as far as your question as to, you know, are we taking this? Are we trying to make our case to people to policymakers and people in the agencies or the White House or in Congress? Most definitely so. Like MIT and Stanford and Berkeley too. I'm sure we have an Office of Federal Relations, hardworking and very talented people who you know, understand far better than certainly than I do how you get a point across in Washington, D.C. It's definitely not the same as the way you do it at the university. Randy here has lots and lots of experience in this, and you know, you know, universities do have people happily with that kind of experience like Randy to be able to try and press this point. But Harvard has been very actively engaged. The Harvard president has been in his visits to DC. He mentioned this in every conversation that he has. It really is a you know, kind of existential question for us as far as, you know, what our futures as research universities are going to look like. So I remain optimistic, but you know, this is a process that is going to take some time, and much will depend on, you know, getting clearer statements from the government, as Richard has said, and you know, we've made efforts here. Maybe I'll say this and then stop, to try to engage directly with members of the FBI who've been responsible for the China initiative, in the belief that, you know, a dialogue is better than just mutual disregard and pretending the other's not there. And I would say that you know, we pressed for more information about, like, for instance, we are told to be vigilant about our collaborations with China or with Chinese universities. So you know, the question was asked, so what does that mean? And, you know, are there specific institutions with which we should avoid collaborating? And the FBI, at least in this conversation, has no such list, at least not one that they're willing to share. But be careful of any universities with ties to the Chinese government. Well, that's not very helpful. You don't have to be much of a China expert to know that there's no university in China that doesn't have ties to the US, to the Chinese government. And by the standards that are applied in some lists that have been created, such as the list at the Australia Strategic Policy Institute. All of our schools would also be on such a list because of the ties that we have to the US government. So surely that's not the right standard to be using. And if it's not, then what is? And is there a way we can work? I mean, again, recognizing the possibility that there are spies out there. No one is denying that. There are spies on both sides. That's how the world works. Let's be smart about this, though, and not create, as Richard, I think, so aptly put it, not come up with solutions that are far worse than the problem that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Mark. Really very good observations. One motivation for us to organize this webinar is to have conversation across 4 excellent academic institutions and maybe share some knowledge. And I just wonder if going forward, there is a conversation to be had with the US government, but maybe there should be more conversations among American universities about these issues. Maybe I can turn to Richard only because I know a little bit more about what MIT has done. So Richard, you said that there are cases that are not clear cut and universities should be more proactive in those cases. Can you share with us some of the things that MIT has done in terms of setting up process, setting up procedure, and things like that? And then after Richard, I'll invite others to join in to talk about the things that they have done at their own universities.
Yeah, thanks, Yasheng. I think maybe the place to start on this is to say that this is the challenge for universities, or one of the challenges is compliance, to understand what it is that the government is asking for, and often that's not so easy because the government itself isn't always sure of what it's asking for. But in any event, compliance is an important part of the job that universities have. We obviously must be compliant with law and regulation. But I think the challenge for universities goes, particularly research universities, goes beyond compliance, because there are situations that we encounter that may have to do with research collaborations. They may have to do with working with organizations, companies, government agencies, which are not proscribed, not prohibited, but where it's necessary to think hard about the risks, which may have to do with national security. They may have to do with economic security. They may have to do with human rights issues, where, again, there's no red line that the government has established, but where we as academic institutions have to make judgments about whether proceeding with a project or with an alliance, with an engagement of some kind, is the right thing to do. And we, recognizing that this is a situation that arises with some frequency, about 3 years ago, we established a process, or a set of processes at MIT, in which all of the possible situations, projects, alliances, engagements, what have you, that involve China and other countries that pose security risks to the United States are reviewed by different parts of the university administration. But I think one of the things that I want to emphasize about this process, well, let me just emphasize two things. One is that it has to be collaborative with the PI. And it is collaborative with the PI. Randy described an interaction with one of his faculty members, which to me sounded very familiar because it was consultative, it was collaborative with the PI, but it also recognized that while our faculty know their research areas better than anyone else, obviously, they may not have thought about all of the risks that the proposed collaboration raise. I mean, they may not have, and very often they have not got the kind of background that is necessary to make a judgment about this. So that's something that the university can and should provide. And so we've created a process that is consultative. And by the way, that also provides opportunities for other members of the community to weigh in. And that's important because some of the risks here of at least certain kinds of engagements do go well beyond the PI and affect the university as a whole. And other members of the community have legitimate interests in those reputational questions. So the process has to provide opportunities for others to weigh in without infringing on the academic freedom of the PI. So the design of these processes is not straightforward. There are a number of considerations. We established our approach to this a little over, or almost 3 years ago now. And I would say that we're continually refining it as we understand what the limitations are. And I think it's better than it was 3 years ago, but I think it will continue to improve as we see opportunities to make it work better.
Thank you, Richard. Randy.
Yes, I first of all want to, sort of thank the leadership of the president of MIT on this topic, my colleague, the vice chancellor, vice provost for research at MIT, as well as establishing these kinds of processes. There's a lot as a community we could learn from each other in terms of best practices. But the comment I really want to focus on is the way to take down the China initiative is to work collaboratively across our universities. And so I make a challenge to my colleagues at Stanford, MIT, and Harvard to work together to improve the transparency of the investigative processes that have been ongoing on our campuses. The sort of DOJ investigations have been conducted in a manner that does not adhere to American values, an open and transparent process, an assumption of innocence until proven guilty, and the right of appeal. There is no right of appeal to the current set of investigations. And I'm talking about not the indictments and trials that we read about in the newspaper, but the sort of investigations underway on every single one of our campuses initiated. Department of Justice is kind of behind the scenes, but through one of our research funding agencies, I'm thinking, for example, the National Institute of Health, who has gone on record that there are over 140 or maybe at this point over 200 investigations at universities. NIH knows everything about the progress of those investigations, the number that led to a determination of guilt or noncompliance, a set of punishments negotiated with universities. At the University of California at Berkeley, we had one such investigation. I know about the outcome of one. NIH knows about hundreds. What are we as a community collectively, without sharing any information, doing in terms of pursuing these investigations on behalf of the federal agencies, making some judgments, some adjudications, negotiating some sanctions, potentially against faculty? No one knows how many of these investigations led to a finding of everything was okay. We only know about the high headline cases that make it into the press, and that's because the federal agencies know everything, and we as individual universities only know about our own investigations. Now, this is put in the context of we must maintain the privacy of our faculty who are being investigated, and I, of course, adhere to that. But why can we not, our four institutions, share information? How many investigations? What were the outcome? What were the nature of the sanctions for those outcomes that were determined, some failure in reporting or compliance or whatever? We do not do that. And so as a community, we do not have the data. In fact, the vice president for research at MIT brought this issue up in I think it was in the context of a PCAST hearing on the topic or something like that, of the universities have limited information, the federal government has all the information, and that is unfair, unsymmetric, untransparent, and essentially un-American. And I think we can work together at our level, at the level of the panelists, in order to advance the agenda here.
I'd like to get reactions from other panelists on Randy's call for our joint collective call for more transparency. Peter?
Yeah, I heartily endorse that. I think it's, we certainly want to maintain the privacy of individuals who are being investigated, but that's possible, and the government should do that. I think they also need to really share at least data on the outcomes. And I would say those cases that end up with criminal prosecutions by the Department of Justice, has said this earlier, the track record, what's on the public record, isn't all that, it's pretty bad. And yet I've never heard the federal government ever acknowledge that they screwed up. Maybe I missed something, but I've never heard an apology or to at least several people that I've gotten to know who were prosecuted and not convicted. And in many cases, the case is dropped after they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers. And in that regard, I'm going to point out one thing that our colleagues at Princeton, there's I think a very useful website at Princeton called Know Your Rights. And there's actually guidelines about dealing with if you're approached by a federal agent, law enforcement, what your rights are, including consulting with a lawyer and so forth. And I think it's important for people to know what their rights are, because we're a nation of laws. And I think people don't often realize that they do have these rights. Even if a federal agent wants to talk to you, you're not accused of anything, but you should know what your rights and what your responsibilities are. And a lot of faculty, I don't think really know that. They probably know it now. I think there's been enough attention on this that people are learning, but it's not just faculty, it's students, it's postdocs, and so forth. And it can be very intimidating and harmful. And I don't think it helps our national reputation. And I come back to what I do think the most important thing our universities do is the generation of knowledge that is widely shared and the training of students who go on to do great things in advancing the science and technology and innovation in this country. And I think very little of it is in academia has to do with stealing intellectual property.
Yeah. Can I just follow up on that? I want to say that I think there's much that our universities can do together along the lines that Randy suggested, but going beyond some of the things that he suggested. I mean, one of the things I'm particularly concerned about is the efforts that federal agencies are making, in some cases, to impose limits on the kinds of research projects in which Chinese and other international students can participate. And I can say definitively, I'm sure this would be agreed at your universities, we don't believe that universities should be required to discriminate by nationality or national origin in determining which individuals among those who are legally in the United States should and shouldn't be permitted to work on projects. I mean, I think a clear statement on that issue would be very helpful. A related concern is with efforts that federal agencies are making to blur the distinction between classified and unclassified research by expanding the reach of things that have different names, but one of the names is so-called controlled unclassified information. I think it was Randy who's already mentioned this. We have no compelling evidence that would support changing National Security Directive 189. That's been US policy since the Reagan administration. It states that academic research should generally be published openly. What we're seeing is, I think, a fraying of the consensus around that issue, which I think will be very damaging to our institutions. And this is damage that goes beyond the Chinese community at our institutions. These are fundamental, in my view, fundamental threats to the nature of academic research. So I think we should speak out on all of these issues. And thank you for suggesting that, Randy. I think we have a lot of work to do.
Mark?
Let me chime in here. Yeah, let me chime in here briefly, just to say that I fully believe in the importance of, we're talking about collaboration, and collaboration can cut many ways, and collaboration among our institutions would be a great thing. And we do some of it already. We probably don't do enough. And I'd be happy after we're done here, find time to discuss ways in which we can work together. My portfolio at Harvard does not include compliance, and so I'm not aware of the issues that Randy has referred to. Doubtless they're here. We're in between vice provosts for research right now, so I hope to have a colleague soon with whom could bring that person to the table. But clearly, again, there are some limits in terms of the things that we're allowed to all do together as universities, lest we be seen as a trust. But this would seem to fall well within what's permitted. The more that we are able to make our voices heard at different levels and in different places, in both state as well as in federal legislature, I think a lot of this is also potential implications, major implications for local economies all around the country. The more the US looks to be an unfriendly place for foreign students to come, whether they're from China or from any other part of the world, the harder it appears to foreign students to be able to translate their US earned degree to a potential long-term employment in this country. And the easier it is to do that in other places. We will not win that competition for the best and the brightest. Right now we make it very hard. I mean, many of you on this call have been through this process. You don't need to tell you how hard it is to figure out a way to stay here if you want to. And most people, wherever they're coming from, they're coming to the United States. Their hope is to at least have the choice, and we make that really, really hard. So I think there are both on immigration policy. We've been talking mostly about DOJ types of things, but on immigration policy as well, there is a lot of work to be done. And if I may, Yasheng, just very quickly in the chat, I wanted to call to just make a brief comment on a comment by John Grant, who writes, the discussion has focused on the university-US government nexus. What engagement, if any, do you do or should you have with policymakers in China? So I actually have thought about this somewhat, and I'm not sure about policymakers in China because, well, nobody really knows how policy is made in China, because you want to talk about lack of transparency, that would be Exhibit A. But I do think that there is room for us to engage in a conversation with our academic colleagues in China, leaders of universities in China, whom we know well, many of us. The top universities in China back in 2013 all signed something called the Hefei Statement, Hefei Xuanyan, which lists the 10 properties of research universities. 关于当代研究型大学的10项特质. This is, everyone signed this? No one was under duress? The principles here are principles that all research universities around the world agree to. I think it would be great to have a conversation around those principles and to reaffirm our mutual commitment, everybody, to adhering to those as a way of, again, trying to show that we are serious about this. We are not assuming complete innocence on any front, but we are determined to take the steps that we can to make sure that we know who our collaborators are and that we are all working from the same essential rule book when it comes to how scientific work gets done in all fields.
Thank you, Mark. I think this is an excellent suggestion. I also think if we do have that conversation, we American universities should do it together. So then not single university is being singled out. Okay. So it's amazing four academics agree on so much. Maybe we have time for one or two questions. Xiaodong, if you could direct some of the questions.
Okay, so there are more comments than questions. Let me quickly read two comments and one question. We need to attract brilliant people from around the world and persuade them to stay. This requires that we be welcoming to scholars from all over the world. This begins with a collaboration with scholars from everywhere. Another comment is, when I was at Cornell, there was never any directive to work with any specific country. There was a directive to solve technical problems in the fastest manner, recruiting the best and bright. Somewhere become embargoed. There's one question from actually the person from Canada. Here in Canada, Alberta's Minister of Higher Education simply announced a few months ago that all the major 4 public universities in the province, including University of Alberta and University of Calgary, immediately stop any new collaborations activities with China. He also ordered 90-day deadline for these universities to submit their existing collaboration program with China for review. All senior administration people at these 4 universities have stayed silent, facing such direct government intervention. Has such thing happened in US? Will this happen in the near future? Would like to see your comments and response to this. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe just to respect time, we just have a fast round of response. Maybe go by Peter and then Richard and then Randy and Mark. You can go beyond this particular question.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with what the situation in Canada that was referred to. So I really can't comment on that. I didn't catch all that. I do think one comment I would make about having discussions with colleagues in China and institutions. I think it's not just universities, but I think some professional societies, and particularly I think the American Physical Society has really shown a model that of the leadership of the APS working with academic leaders in China and having really great discussions, many of them under Chatham House rules and that sort of thing. But I think it's really important to have those dialogues. And I also am reminded of something that a former defense secretary who's now at an institution at Stanford, the Hoover Institution, said recently, not about research, but more generally about the relationship with China. And this was Jim Mattis, said that it was important to have constant dialogue at many levels and to do it in a respectful way. I think it's wise advice.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, so with respect to the question, nothing like that has happened in the United States. And I don't think it will, but I do think that it is possible, indeed, we're already seeing it, for much less direct actions, or in some cases even lack of actions by the government to have an almost equivalent effect. Because what we're seeing, I think probably others are seeing this too, is that faculty who might previously have considered engaging in collaborations with Chinese colleagues are choosing not to do so because they are just uncertain about the risks, and they find that it's better just not to go down that path. So even though we don't have, and I don't think we will have, a prohibition of the kind you described or the question described, I think there is a real cutback in engagement on research with Chinese colleagues and Chinese researchers. And I think we should be asking very clearly of policymakers, is that what you really want? Is that what is in the interests of American science, American technology? Is that what you want? Because I'm concerned that in the current situation, the de facto result of our current policies is to greatly reduce interactions, research and intellectual interactions and research interactions with China. And from my perspective, that is not a good outcome.
Thank you, Richard. Randy?
Just a couple of summary points. The first one is at the University of California, it's a fundamental principle that our campuses will accept no sponsored research projects which limit participation due to country of origin, period. This dates back to the loyalty oath controversy of the 1950s and the faculty's response to that. So limitations on research funding mean we have to have the courage to stick to our principles and to reject opportunities for research funding if they come with these constraints. And courage is one of those important virtues that some individuals have and others don't. And, some university presidents have stepped forward and been outspoken about this, even though they may attract attention as a result. I'm thinking particularly of the MIT president. On the other hand, my chancellor has certainly not put any effort to inhibit my visibility in terms of pursuing these things. We have an ongoing collaboration called the Tsinghua Berkeley Shenzhen Institute. I am continuing to push for a second phase of this strong research collaboration with colleagues in China. It evokes all manner of export control considerations, China initiative considerations, and so on. We've developed a set of processes and review with Department of Commerce and so on in order to craft an agreement which complies, yet allows us to go forward in a sort of bilateral collaboration. I think our universities must be committed to finding models that allow us to work at a large and visible scale with our Chinese collaborators and have the courage of our research administration to support us in those endeavors.
Thank you, Randy. Mark, some final words.
Yeah, I'll be very quick here. I just want to endorse everything that's been said. Randy, particularly quite eloquent on that point last. I think it's been said that the research relationship, the academic relationship between the United States and China has historically been a two-way street. It needs to be a two-way street. Speaking just briefly, if I may, about research in social sciences and humanities, it has not been a two-way street for quite some years now. Access to libraries and archives in China for people like myself, even though I work on the 17th and 18th centuries, that doesn't mean it's not political. And it's been very hard to get, for me or for my students, to get access to stuff. Yasheng, I'm sure you have some of the same issues. So this does need to be a two-way street, and we need to hold our ground there as well as with our own government in the ways that have been announced here. It's very hard to do some of this. We continue to have very productive research collaborations with a number of many, I can't even count how many, with different universities and institutes in China, including some directed specifically at public health and COVID research and such like. So there are most definitely ways in which we can collaborate, and we must continue to make a point of doing that, or it really will all fade away, especially in conditions when it's impossible almost impossible anyhow, for people to actually physically travel back and forth without having to spend a month in quarantine, which is just, that's a too high a price for most people to be able to pay. I think that we will, I'm hopeful anyhow, that in 2020, by the end of 2022 anyhow, we will begin to see a resumption of some movement back and forth, which will open the door, I hope, for dialogue across between universities that will help to make sure that the door doesn't get completely shut on the research collaborations that have been so beneficial to all of us, and that have, I think continue to be crucial to our success, to the success of our faculty, our students, and as we began by saying, brings all kinds of benefits to the country as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Peter. We heard many, many good ideas, and some are actionable. And maybe to Randy's point about lack of individual courage, maybe we can do it collectively to make it up. Thank you so much on behalf of AASF. This is an excellent webinar. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.